Welcome to the Psychology of Health. My name is Milan Toma. I'm an associate professor at New York Institute of Technology, College of Osteopathic Medicine. If you're new to this podcast, let me clarify what you can expect. Here, I present a clear synthesis of research studies on health-related topics, no personal opinions, no hype, and no misinformation. My goal is to make complex scientific evidence accessible and understandable, focusing solely on what the research shows. Today's episode is no exception. I'll be exploring a fundamental challenge that faces nutrition science and public health policy: the persistent issue of dietary underreporting bias, particularly when studying obesity and population health trends, drawing exclusively from peer-reviewed studies and large-scale analyses, so you can trust that what you hear is grounded in the best available evidence, not individual perspective. Before we get into the details, I want to emphasize a crucial point right at the start. The material we discuss today is based on large-scale studies involving great numbers of people, and the correlations found are based on population averages. It is incredibly important for every listener to understand that these general trends and systematic biases found in huge data sets are not meant to be taken personally. Just because researchers have found certain correlations or tendencies among large groups of individuals does not mean that those findings apply to you specifically or to anyone you know. Nutrition research often involves analyzing broad trends to inform public policy, but individual metabolic rates, eating habits, and reporting behaviors vary widely. So, please, listen to this discussion through the lens of population science and methodology, rather than personal critique. The challenge scientists face in nutrition research is the fundamental difficulty in getting accurate measurements of self-reported dietary intake. This is a pervasive issue, but it is especially pronounced among specific segments of the population. Individuals with overweight or obesity tend to underreport their consumption of food and calories to a much greater extent compared to those who are considered non-obese. In fact, the systematic nature and substantial size of the problem of underreporting among people who have obesity is so thoroughly documented and significant that it really requires a dedicated discussion all its own. For scientists and policymakers to properly interpret national dietary surveillance data and to accurately understand the complex relationship between reported food intake and the rise of obesity, understanding both the sheer magnitude of this underreporting and its practical implications is vital. When researchers ask people to recall the food they have eaten, numerous studies consistently demonstrate that on average, individuals underreport their actual intake of food. However, as mentioned, this particular tendency is far from uniform across the entire population. Those individuals who have a higher body mass index are much more likely to underreport their intake. This underreporting applies not only to the total number of calories consumed, but also to specific categories of food that are often perceived as unhealthy, such as those items that are particularly high in fat or high in sugar. We can see the stark reality of this systematic underreporting when we look at large national surveys. Consider the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, a massive data collection effort in the United States. In these surveys, the majority of the respondents who have obesity have reported calorie intakes that are so low they would not even be sufficient to sustain their basic metabolic functions, let alone support their actual measured body weight. This kind of consistent pattern, where reported intake severely deviates from biological possibility, has become a defining and expected feature of self-reported dietary data within the field of obesity research. It is clear that individuals with obesity systematically and substantially underreport the amount of food and calories they consume. This pattern means that relying on self-reported dietary data for this specific group renders that data highly unreliable. This realization forced researchers to seek more objective, biologically grounded methods to validate these self-reported figures. The gold standard technique for objectively measuring the amount of energy a person actually burns, which, for individuals whose weight remains stable over time, must match the calories they consume, is known as the doubly labeled water method. I mentioned the term doubly labeled water method in previous episode, but I failed to explain it. My bad. Sorry about that. Succinctly speaking, it is a powerful technique which is based on giving a person specialized water. This water is unique, because both its hydrogen atoms and its oxygen atoms have been replaced with rare, non-radioactive isotopes. Once ingested, these isotopes mix throughout the body's water systems. They are then gradually eliminated from the body through various processes, including urine, sweat, and breath. So, by tracking the rate at which these isotopes disappear from the body over a period of days or weeks, scientists can achieve a precise calculation of the person's total energy expenditure. Because energy intake should, in the long run, be equivalent to energy expenditure for an individual to maintain a stable weight, the doubly labeled water method provides an objective and indisputable benchmark. This benchmark allows scientists to accurately compare how many calories a person reports eating versus how many calories they must actually be consuming to sustain their body size. When researchers have employed the doubly labeled water technique to validate dietary data that was self-reported, the findings have been absolutely striking and consistent. Individuals who have obesity consistently underreport their daily calorie intake by an average of 700 to 850 kilocalories per day. To put that magnitude into perspective, this level of underreporting represents up to 40% of their actual required energy needs. This is a massive discrepancy. In sharp contrast, when researchers look at lean individuals, they also tend to underreport their intake, but by a much smaller margin. Typically, this smaller margin is only 10% to 20%. The research clearly indicates that the degree of dietary underreporting systematically increases alongside increases in a person's body mass index. This underreporting is especially pronounced or exaggerated when individuals report on foods that are perceived or labeled as unhealthy. Studies using the objective measure provided by the doubly labeled water technique consistently show that individuals with obesity underreport their calorie intake significantly more than lean individuals. This objective scientific evidence confirms the deep systematic bias inherent in self-reported data. Further evidence of the scale of this problem comes from detailed analysis of nearly 4 decades of National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey data. Across all the years this massive survey was conducted, 67% of the women surveyed and 59% of the men surveyed reported energy intakes that were determined to be physiologically implausible. That is to say, the reported intakes were far too low to actually sustain life, given their measured body size. Among adults who had obesity, the proportion of individuals reporting these implausible intakes was even higher. For this group, the average degree of underreporting exceeded 700 to 850 kilocalories per day. In certain survey cycles included in the data analysis, fewer than 1 in 4 women with obesity reported calorie intakes that were considered physiologically plausible. These alarming findings are not confined to the United States alone. Similar, consistent patterns demonstrating systematic underreporting bias have been observed in studies conducted in various other countries and across a wide range of study designs. So, the critical question remains: why does this underreporting bias happen, especially among individuals with obesity? Several intertwined factors contribute to this consistent tendency of people with higher body mass index to underreport what they eat. One of the major contributing elements is what is known as social desirability bias. This is the deep-seated desire that people have to provide answers that will be viewed favorably by others. This desire to conform or present a better image plays an especially significant role, largely because public awareness regarding the health risks associated with obesity and certain food types has dramatically increased over recent decades. Beyond the purely psychological factor of social desirability, people may also genuinely forget or substantially misestimate the true size of the portions they consume. This genuine misestimation is particularly common for items such as snacks, beverages, or foods that are eaten when they are outside the home environment. Crucially, researchers have identified selective underreporting. This pattern is particularly common for specific food categories, especially those foods that are recognized as being high in fat or high in sugar. These types of foods are often explicitly labeled as bad or discouraged in public health messaging, which may influence individuals to omit them from their reporting or minimize the amounts consumed. The systematic underreporting of food intake specifically by individuals with obesity, carries profound implications, not just for the academic field of nutrition research, but also for the creation and implementation of effective public health policy. The existence of this bias means that the national dietary surveillance data that relies primarily on self-reported intake simply cannot be used to accurately estimate the true consumption of calories within the population. This inability to accurately estimate true consumption is especially problematic for those groups who are considered most at risk for diseases related to obesity. Therefore, apparent trends that show declines or increases in calorie intake or specific nutrient intake over time may not actually reflect genuine changes in population eating habits. Instead, these apparent trends might be artifacts, reflecting changes in how people report their behavior, perhaps due to modifications in survey methodology or shifts in social desirability bias. This crucial limitation must be fully acknowledged and accounted for whenever scientists attempt to interpret studies that seek to establish a link between dietary trends and the escalating prevalence of obesity. Because some people with obesity underreport their intake to a significantly greater extent than lean individuals do, the self-reported dietary data is fundamentally flawed and cannot be used to accurately assess true calorie consumption or its relationship to population obesity trends. When we review the main takeaway points from this research, several vital mandates emerge for anyone involved in nutrition, science, or policy development. First, we must emphasize the caution needed. It is important not to take self-reported calorie or food intake at face value. This self-reported data is systematically biased and will invariably underestimate the true consumption, especially among some individuals who have a higher body mass index. Secondly, researchers must avoid automatically assuming that any reported declines or increases in overall calorie intake observed in population surveys reflect real changes in eating behavior. As discussed, changes in the methods used for the survey or alterations in social desirability bias over time may be the actual mechanisms responsible for creating these apparent trends. Thirdly, whenever it is feasible and practical, objective measures such as the doubly labeled water technique should be actively used to validate all dietary intake data. These objective methods provide a much more accurate and biologically plausible picture of the true energy consumption occurring within the population being studied. Fourth, we must maintain a high degree of caution when interpreting any observed associations between self-reported diet and specific health outcomes within populations with obesity. The sheer magnitude of the underreporting bias, which can exceed 700 to 850 kilocalories per day, has the potential to severely distort the true relationships that researchers are trying to observe. Finally, it is vital to recognize and understand that underreporting bias represents a major systemic barrier to accurately understanding the true fundamental drivers of obesity at the population level. Consequently, any major policy decisions or public health recommendations related to nutrition should be carefully developed and based on objective evidence whenever that is possible. The core finding is undeniable. Some individuals with obesity underreport their food intake far more significantly than their lean counterparts. This conclusion is powerfully revealed by objective scientific studies that employ methods like the doubly labeled water technique. This systematic and substantial bias fundamentally undermines the validity and reliability of relying on self-reported dietary data both in academic obesity research and in broad public health surveillance efforts. The goal, moving forward, is to acknowledge this bias, utilize objective measures to bypass it, and ensure that our understanding of public health is based on sound, biologically plausible data. Before we wrap up, I want to emphasize something important. These findings come from population-level studies and describe general trends, not individual destinies. Just because research shows that some people with obesity tend to underreport their food intake more than lean individuals, it does not mean that every person with obesity does this, or that it applies to you personally. Population studies reveal patterns across large groups, but individuals are unique. Many factors like genetics, environment, and personal habits shape each person's experience. So, if you see yourself reflected in these trends, remember, it's not a judgment or a personal criticism, but rather an observation that helps scientists improve research methods and public health recommendations. The goal is to better understand the big picture, not to single out or blame anyone. If you're interested in your own nutrition or health, the best approach is always to focus on your individual needs and consult with healthcare professionals who can provide personalized guidance. Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Psychology of Health. As always, everything discussed here is based on a careful synthesis of published research, not personal opinion. My aim is to provide you with a clear, unbiased summary of what the science actually shows, so together we can better understand the complexities of health and nutrition. If you'd like to review the studies referenced in this episode, please check the episode notes. I hope this discussion has helped clarify the evidence and provided useful context for interpreting health information in your own life. Until next time, thanks for listening.